Hi, I'm Marc Loftus, editor of Post, and in this podcast, I'm again joined by Dell Technologies' Alex Timbs and Arcitecta's Jason Lohrey, both of whom have shared their expertise in the past as we've looked at the importance of managing metadata, global namespaces, orchestrated workflows. And in our last podcast, Alex and Jason called attention to some of the advancements in technology that are making it easier for those seeking to steal content or hold it for ransom. Today, we pick up on that discussion of cybersecurity with a look at what's happening in the media and entertainment space and how these intrusions can be prevented. Jason, Alex, both of you, welcome back.
Thanks, Marc. I'm really excited to be able to share some more thoughts on cybersecurity.
Likewise, really nice to be back.
Thanks again for joining us. Obviously, we touched on this a bit in the past, and it's not that we have all of the answers, but we do have some of the signals that content creators should be aware of, whether it's because of their workflow, et cetera. Why is this happening? We talked just a little bit last time about technology is enabling this. And what are we identifying as some of the reasons that maybe are putting some of these studios or content creators at risk?
I think from the technology perspective, at the highest level, it's really just about the level of connectivity, the ease of connecting and the amount of connections that we have, the complexity of these environments. But I think that it really falls back onto it being a fundamental cultural issue in a lot of these businesses. Because after many years of experience myself, along with some of my contacts in the industry that are TPN and ISO certified auditors, some of the conclusions that I could draw from those conversations are that facilities globally generally have very poor cyber posture and should be considered very exposed. And this, I think, is because of a manifest governance failure in both private and public sectors, combined with a lack of revenue in the industry and a blasé attitude, which really leads to these risks, I think.
I think the risks are increasing because of improvements in connectivity. It's easier to get to other places around the globe. It's faster. So the technology is enabling us to launch attacks more easily. Moreover, we're in a world where we're offering services to the rest of the world. So it's publicly accessible, or we're collecting valuable sets of data. So medical records, financial data, the world is operating around data. So we've got these honeypots of data that are interconnected around the globe, and those interconnections are increasingly faster and easier to get to. So that's actually allowing people to mount these attacks more effectively. There are a couple of other things that are happening. You've got global conflict, so there are governments driving this for advantage. You've got manipulation of societies politically and otherwise. So getting a hold of someone's identity, you can steal you can get financial advantage, but you can also get societal advantage and advantage over those people in all sorts of abstract ways, or ways that may not be obvious at first, political or others, or understanding how society works. So everybody's trying to get an advantage, and those are at government down to private and criminal levels, and just fundamentally the entire ecosystem is more connected.
Is it a worst case scenario attitude where you're willing to take a risk, wondering what that worst case could be, or not making change until that worst case scenario takes place? Is that the attitude where, well, it hasn't happened yet, we'll worry about it when it does, and when it does, then we'll have to take the most dramatic action, but until then, we'll let it fly and take chances?
Yep. I'm going to jump in here first, Alex. I would lay money on the fact that most people really wouldn't understand what their exposure points are and what the sort of threats are out there. If you were to say today, what is your risk profile, that will be something that will be conducted by your board, your senior management, and understand that from a company point of view. There are two sides. You need to do that from the top down, but there's also the technology point at the coming in. I bet you many people won't know where their exposure points are. On top of that, who do you turn to understand what your true risk profile is? We need to equip ourselves much better.
Very good point, Jason. Look, I think that the risk is not well understood. Most businesses will have a very patchy understanding of what risk is, how to define it, what their unique risk profiles are. And so there's absolutely a huge role to play in pulling everything back to the basics and actually unpacking what you think your risk is in your business. And everyone's view will be different, but starting with that can be very valuable. But Marc, you started off by talking about cultural issues, and I'm a very strong supporter of the fact that I think most of these issues stem from cultural roots. And it really comes from poor maturity targets in these businesses. And also as a result of that, no investment, flowing to attain higher maturity targets. So, it's resulting in these manifest non-existent policies or ad hoc processes and poor documentation, etc. And that is due to that lack of top-down approach, that lack of management buy-in from the outset of going on this journey. And it's really a complete lack of understanding that we see at the executive level on what their role is and how an ISMS information security management system benefits the business, that it is a business benefit. It is a fundamental part of running their business. And also lack of defined tangible outcomes as part of the implementation of any kind of process or change management. And still seeing it as an IT problem, which Jason touched on.
We've talked about that in the past, where people think that it is an IT problem, but it's really everybody's problem, and that could start at the top, and it's not singularly the IT side.
Very true.
Well, actually, we've got two divides here. You've got the IT guys on one side, that's over in a camp, but you can't bundle them all up in one. How do you know as an entity that your IT people or persons are appropriately equipped to deal with a modern cyber environment? The answer is you probably don't. You've got to make sure that they're appropriately assessed and they've got ongoing training. You can't just make an assumption that you just leave it to the IT guys and they'll figure it out. Mm-hmm. That's poor risk management. Since we last spoke, Marc, there are just every week, maybe every few days, there are stories of people being broken into, data stolen, held to ransom. I don't know whether it's empirically the case, but it feels like the intensity is increasing. It's like a hot summer. But why is that? I'm sure some of the companies that have been broken into, if they haven't got a cyber resilience strategy in place, then that's in a way a bit negligent. They haven't actually addressed one of their key risks. If they have, and that's what I believe that they will have made an attempt to have this in place, then it hasn't been effective. So the question is, why hasn't it been effective? So it doesn't matter that we say we've got one. If it's not effective, then it's not useful. So we're really got to have an honest conversation about what we do know and what we don't know and what we need to know, the known knowns and the unknown unknowns, and come to grips with that.
It's interesting you talk about how effective it is. I mean, you see these trusted partner networks that come together to kind of create best practices. I was at the NAB show in New York last week, and there were a number of manufacturers talking about how their solutions protect you. But how qualified is that? I mean, when you buy into this and you're thinking that everything is protected, is it, or are you getting a false sense of security? And do you not know until it's too late?
You aren't protected by default. The technology is not going to protect you by default. Technology can be aligned with a best practice, and they can certainly build into any kind of solution an alignment with the best practices, and so that you're more likely to be able to position that in your environment as a trusted solution. But without the fundamental governance, policy, and talent to be able to deliver that into your organization, you're just as exposed as you would otherwise be, I think. And I think that has the potential to create a false sense of security. So there's many pieces of this puzzle, and they all need to be considered, not just getting a tick next to a validation box.
Mm-hmm. Actually, who does the validation? Is that self-validated, or is there independent validation? Unless it's independently validated, I'm not sure that it has that much merit. You need, in effect, independent validation. That means you're prepared to open yourself up to scrutiny to others. Mm-hmm. And the first rule of security is you should not have security through obscurity. you need to open up what you're doing and allow yourself to be challenged about your processes. That means other people can pick holes in it, because if they don't, then someone who's seeking to gain advantage will find a hole. So you need to get validation that what you're using, but then it is a whole system. So just because one point solution in the technology stack protects a certain amount of data or information or valuable assets, there's a whole ecosystem out there. Let's look at the ways in which people gain advantage. We know about ransomware, where people encrypt your data and then say that they'll unlock it if you pay them a fee. That's fine. I think technology can help us with that and close that gap. We still need humans to be aware of these things happening and astute to anomalies in the system in order to pick up these events happening. But technology can help us a lot there. The theft of data is a trickier area to deal with. I think technology can help us here if they see a flow of data from somewhere from one place to another, an unusual flow. We've got to monitor those. But in reality, you can't stop someone taking a photo of the screen and printing it off and taking it to somewhere else. That's really hard. So for that, you need intelligence out there to be monitoring behavior. So you know that a person had access to information, and they've got connectivity to someone else who then actually gains advantage from that. That's a bigger intelligence question. But I think from a technology point of view, we can pick up a lot of these anomalies. We need to focus on that. But we need to be working culturally from the top down. No, we need to understand what those risks are and what we can and can't avoid, e.g. that really malicious attempt to steal things. But we need to build a culture around here that changes the way in which people operate. And that's not a technology solution.
Jason, you had some thoughts on centralized versus decentralized data storage there, and how one could lead to more problems, or as opposed to an option of not having it all centralized. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, whether it's a danger to have centralized data storage? And obviously with connectivity, we're looking at global production these days.
If you put all of your valuable assets in the one building, in the one safe, if you put all of your gold reserves in the world in one building, what do you think would happen? Everyone would be there trying to break into it.
Yeah,
it's a target. It's probably in some ways easier to defend because you've only got to defend one target. But if that target becomes compromised, all of it's gone. All your eggs in one basket. And I think that's what happens when you centralize your data in single systems. I think the key to resilience is if someone breaks into a single system and it's got the answer to life, the universe, and everything, the game's up. If someone breaks in and steals your genetic identity, the game is up. You can never redact that. So the more information that's held in the one location, the more valuable it is to break into that. The way you break that down is you decentralize your information. There's only one part of the pictures here, another's over here, or a small holding of data is in one location and the others. So as much as you can, decentralize your data. So if one system gets compromised, then you've only lost a small portion of the data. What do you think, Alex?
Jason, completely agree. I mean, a good example of that is the recent compromise of a major ISP in Australia, where I think it was roughly 50% of Australia's population or thereabouts, experienced theft of data of some shape or form. And there are other businesses that experienced data loss in the ensuing weeks. So this is a big example of a significant bust, basically by someone breaking into a centralized system that contains that data. As a response to these attacks, and I'm not talking about the Australian government, but governments in general around the world, from what I've been seeing, often want to, centralize ID and become an authority in authentication, which is another form of data. The issue that I have with this is that, there are a number of issues. Firstly, that the trust that the public, that the private sector and the general public have in the public sector or government, it is at all-time lows, which offers some friction. But the point you made, I think, is the greatest point to make, which is when you centralize everything, guess which is the target that people are going to go after. So it means that there is going to be a lot more resource by these attackers just having to be focused on one target, which I think will always, logic says that it will always lead to heightened risk. And the other factors that I'd like to raise in this are that centralized data, including data that's used for verification or trust confirmation, is not viable during loss of power because it's generally digital. Issues with the power grid. We are entering we're entering a period of significant energy crisis around the world. Network disturbances as a result of that, or malicious damage. And that's something now that's unfortunately a concern due to global conflict, weather events, and the energy shortages I mentioned. And I guess the last point I'd make there would probably be that, governments in general, and this is, not a criticism directly of them, but they're generally exposed because they don't have the same level of highly trained, highly experienced personnel in their employ due to the private sector, paying more or having more attractive roles. So it's just by virtue of the fact they are government, they're not necessarily going to have the caliber of people that you might find in the private sector. And so I think those factors combined mean that centralizing authority for trust or for transaction approval, or as Jason said, your data, your valuable data, is a really bad idea. And decentralizing ID and your data based around a community trust authority is the way to go.
There is a countervailing argument to this, though. Some people will say if you centralize, then you can centralize the expertise. So if you have too much decentralization, then the skill base is decentralized and diluted. There's some merit to that argument, but there's a level of hubris. Because as I said, if you put all of your gold reserves in one building, then that's a significant threat. And it would be arrogant to say we have the world's best defenses to protect ourselves against there indefinitely. So we know those principles apply. Why would they be any different in the digital domain? I think what we really need to do is, if we've got decentralized or distributed systems, those distributed systems can operate under the same frameworks, or maybe they operate under parallel frameworks, because the methods of protection in one system shouldn't be precisely the same as the methods of protection in another. A different team might be involved because they're going to think differently. But we need some oversight over these in best practice. We don't just say we're going to throw it out there to a whole bunch of people and of course they'll figure it out. You need that expertise built up, but just don't put all your eggs in the one basket.
Eggs in one basket. Okay, so that brings us to a conversation about the cloud. And obviously that's a trend that everybody is wanting to use the cloud for their workflow because it enables global, contributions there. But is there still value in having on-premise storage of your own media or a hybrid scenario where you're using the cloud, but you're also keeping things local as well? Are we going to continue doing that, or do you think they are going fully to the cloud?
The data, Marc, that I'm seeing shows a lot of repatriation and a very clear picture of hybrid being the future for most businesses. I think we've sort of touched on that in previous podcasts, but essentially any sort of perpetual workloads that you have a sort of minimum resource requirement around that is at a reasonable scale. If you keep it in the cloud, it's going to affect your cost of revenue quite substantially. And I think that's what a lot of these large companies, that were once startups that have grown are now realizing, and they're repatriating a lot of that data and compute back to on-prem because they're running it as a cost center, not as a profit center like the cloud is. But the cloud definitely plays a role in diversifying your, spreading your risk, I should say, and allows you to do a lot of things with low touch that result in a better security posture in terms of spreading that risk out, or being able to address some of those risks with turnkey solutions, because it's like a menu, like going to a restaurant where you get to pick off the menu. They're generally set up in a more likely to be set up in a best practices manner. So there's certainly value to the cloud, but that the cloud also adds a lot of complexity. The virtualization adds a lot of complexity. Containerization adds immense complexity. So unless, again, to Jason's point, that you've got the right people that deeply understand that environment and can respond to the changing nature of environments around the world, then you're equally, if not more, exposed, because you're now putting trust in a distributed environment that you might not have full visibility or control over.
Let's explore this a little bit more. The cloud is not a magical place. It's a data center with computers in it. And those computers are often on virtualized infrastructure, which is shared amongst other people. So if you were to put all of your eggs in a single data center or a distributed data center or a single provider, is that provider prepared to underwrite the loss and the consequential damages due to cyber loss? So in other words, do they trust themselves enough that they would insure you against any loss? And the answer is going to be no, they won't. It's there to be used. So if that's a computer that's sitting in a data center somewhere or a compute infrastructure, what's the difference between that and on-premise? Absolutely nothing. It's just who owns it and manages the infrastructure is the same, but the risk profile is the same, and you need to be across that. You would hope that in those providers that they would have been attractive for people of good qualification that know something about this, but that means they have to know something about your business and they have to be intimately involved in that. And as far as I know, cloud providers don't do that. They just provide the infrastructure and you are responsible for using that. So you can't outsource that your protection of data and your protecting your business to the cloud provider. So it doesn't matter whether it's in there or it's on premise.
Mm-hmm.
If you go entirely to the cloud, you've violated the principle that you've got all your eggs in one basket. So in a risky world, you must have your eggs in multiple baskets. So that means, to me, a diversity of compute environments, a diversity of geographies, a diversity of technology types. So if you've got data, I come from the data space, but if you're storing data, put it on disk, put it on tape, put it on optical storage, for example. That gives you genetic diversity. Don't just put it all into a black box. Do you know when you go to your cloud provider exactly what the storage is that they're using underneath? They're very opaque about that. And so you won't know. So do you know what your risk profile is? You won't. And the only way to press on that is to ask them to be responsible for the loss. And then let's see whether the cloud provider will front up.
Mm-hmm. One thing that's interesting with the media and entertainment space, as opposed to, say, a government, is the workflow life cycle concept. The fact that you're working with a certain number of vendors for this month or these weeks or however long it is, and then the next project comes in, you're working with a different group. So there's always that opportunity for there to be gaps in your protection there, whereas a government is more of a steady system there. Do you want to talk about how media and entertainment is a little more vulnerable because of those workflow lifecycle issues?
Yeah, the more moving parts you've got, and we're trying to get an advantage. The amount of compute, the complexity of compute is increasing. We need to use the latest technology. We need to leverage people where they are, wherever they are in the globe. We need to avail ourselves of the best of breed at all times to get an advantage, because we're really pushing the boundaries of compute and data intensive operations. Of course, we're going to use new stuff. So that means every time we change those components, we need to assert that they are resilient in a world which is prone to cyber attack. Alex.
Yeah, look, just another take on that is, the media industry specifically, the media and entertainment industry, has a unique workflow cycle that it has these extremes of amplitude, where large amounts of infrastructure are needed for short periods of time. And that's where that sort of, in some situations, an almost desperation appears, where you'll just take anything. You'll use any compute you can find. You'll use any storage you can find. You'll beg, borrow, steal. just to get that show done, because you're under immense pressure. That goalpost is not moving. And so it's this massive, massive weight that is on the business, so you just need to get that show done. That is all that matters in that moment. So that workflow life cycle creates this huge amplitude, and it is also at the same time occurring in a cycle of feast or famine. This is project-based work. You only get paid when you're delivering this work. And so it's often a case of having a period of famine or low or no revenue for periods of time after a show is delivered. So it can present itself to a business as being an insurmountable issue if they don't have the money or the resources to look at cyber when their primary focus is making pretty images. So, how do their thinking is, how do I commit to policy and procedural change, the implementation of an ISMS, when your next job or project is not actually even guaranteed. So the business commitment is just not there because there's no guarantee of that future work or viable revenues coming in the door. So, facilities can implement bits of this, and it will be patchy when they have enough resource to do so. And it's generally much more, a larger facility is much more likely to be able to invest the resource required because they have more constant revenue streams. So these smaller and mid-sized facilities, that are working week by week or month to month or, year to year, where they have no certainty beyond 12 months, they're going to be far less likely to be in a position to be able to make a lot of inroads into improving their cyber posture. And cyber is constantly moving. It's not like you just set something up, check a box, and you're good for 5 years. This is a daily exercise, and so it's understandable that the media and entertainment industry, by virtue of the way that they get work, they complete work, and they bid on work, that the smaller to mid-sized facilities that have less resources are going to be far less likely to be able to present a solid strategy around cyber, just because they don't have the resources.
All right. Well, thanks again, guys. To wrap up, maybe there's a couple of points that we can leave our audience with, some of the issues that they should take into consideration when considering some of the cybersecurity threats out there. You want to start, Jason?
Yeah, I do. I think you need to realize that cyber threats are real, and they're going to escalate, and they're going to impact your business. I think you need to put in place make it a key role in your organization. You need a chief information security officer. That person has to go alongside the CTO, the COO, etc. Be treated like that, and as a part of your business. It needs to be a part of your day-to-day operations. You've got to report on your cyber posture continuously. You can't just do it as a once-off. You need to understand your risks. You need to be honest. And you should never be polite. It's too late to be polite afterwards when someone's ruined your business and you can't operate, or you have to explain why people's private data, personal data, has been exposed. You don't want to be in that position. So you need to be critical, honest, and pull everything apart. And that's driven by someone who knows how to forensically pull apart your posture. And then when you put processes and procedures in place, you need to prove that they work. You need to test them. You need to get other people in to assess that your posture, from the top down, from your management to your processes, right through to your technology, is going to work. Where you use technology from others, whether it's software or hardware, ask those people for a statement on their cyber resilience and how they can address the threats of cyber, because it make them think about this and have to actually position their technology. And if they can't provide that, go to someone else. But we're responsible collectively for stitching these together. So that's the technology side, but we need to focus on people and processes. You need to start with people that are designated to look after this within your organization.
Alex, anything you'd like to add on Jason's thoughts?
Got a few points. Start with a zero trust model. If there's one thing you can do is just don't trust by default. Assume that you can't trust anyone or anything. So, and I'm not talking about just from the technical sense, but also in the cultural sense, to validate all aspects of data, including metadata. Trust no one. Don't trust any system or data set until they've earned it. At the individual level, humans are generally unwilling to invest the time to understand risk and their role in mitigating it. So you need to assume that in your business and make it a cultural challenge, that requires, again, that top-down change with suitable training and also rewarding positive behavior. If there's people that are making great inroads or doing good things in defending your business, make sure you reward them in some way. One thing I don't think we touched on was the sort of moral and ethical part of it. What do you do if you do get ransomed? Is it the right course of action to pay a ransom, or are you encouraging the commercialization of data hostages? I don't have an answer to that because it's unique to each situation. Sometimes that data is just so important to your business that the impact of not paying that ransom outweighs any potential long-term risks, encouraging further attacks. So I don't have a particular view on that. I just think it's something that you should consider when you're thinking about your risk. We touched on the fundamental lack of experience of security personnel. IT, it's seen as an IT problem, but IT isn't properly funded, or IT doesn't have in their job descriptions when they're hiring people the correct remit for being a defender, a cybersecurity expert. You can have a look at some of the current job descriptions in your particular industry. It doesn't have to be media and entertainment. See how many IT-related personnel job ads contain substantial amount of requirements around cybersecurity. Certainly in media and entertainment, most of them have nothing, which is a huge gap. The complexity of the modern IT environment, we touched on that. It's really difficult to manage at the human level. Jason mentioned you got to automate that. You've got to monitor it. So you certainly need a large amount of increasing automation for monitoring and even automated remediations in some cases as the default approach in complex environments. Insurance companies play a huge role, I believe, particularly in media entertainment, from my experience, in closing or addressing that cybersecurity gap, because they can enforce a requirement to have a minimum framework in place before they will give you insurance. So they can play a big role in this. So not only will it improve their posture and their risk profile, but it will also help the industry. As Jason likes to use, it's a forcing function. And I think this was already touched on before, authentication needs to embrace behavioral analytics. So multiple factors, the behavior of the individual that's seeking authentication, biometrics, and it could be multi-point biometrics, multi-factor, along with multiple interlocks for extremely sensitive data. Just like you want multiple people to confirm the launch of a nuclear missile because of the severe impact of that going up without it being what's intended. You want the same for data access that has, top secret or secret or high commercial value. You may want to put multiple interlocks on it so you can get multiple people to confirm that the person that wants access is trusted and has the right to access that data. I'll leave it at that.
It's a lot to digest, a lot of things to take into consideration. Alex, Jason, I want to thank you both again for participating in this podcast, sharing your expertise with our audience, and hope to speak with you again in the future.
Thanks for your time, Marc.
Yeah, thanks, Marc. It's been great.